Now that we have the clutches off and you're ready to install your clutch kit, you'll find when you open the box, the component parts it consists of our new primary spring, a new secondary spring, a new helix, and a set of adjustable pins for the primary, along with a detailed instruction sheet of how to install and the amount of weight you're running in your particular snowmobile. First thing to do, once you have the clutches off the snowmobile, is to separate the primary. You leave the clutch puller bolt in the primary, lift it off the bench a couple, 3 inches, and hit the puller bolt, which will separate the movable face off of the spline of the fixed face. The next thing for disassembly of the primary is to pull the governor cup up and install the button retainer clips. Now that all buttons are held firmly in place with the button retainer clips, you can remove the governor cup. The next thing to do is to remove the spring out of the movable face. Break the bolts loose and remove them completely. Once the bolts have been removed from the spring cup, back your compression tool off, the cup and the spring will come out. Remove the cup and the spring, and the plastic dust cup. Now's a good time, if while you got it apart, is to knock out all the excessive belt dust and pieces of debris that are in the clutch. Once you clean the debris out of the clutch, now's the time because it's easier and more convenient to install the adjustable pins while the spring is out of it. And once we get the cotter pins out and the pins removed, we'll be installing the adjustable pins with the weighted set screws to replace the stock primary pins. Inside the contents of the adjustable pins, you'll see there's 3 pins and an assortment of set screws and new cotter pins for the pins. The easiest way to reinstall the pin is using the new pin to push out the old pin. That way you don't have to worry about alignment of the washers or trying to get them back into place. Once the pin is located in the arm, install the cotter pin to hold it again in the direction that I'm doing this right now. That's the proper direction for the cotter pin to be installed. Bend the tines on the pin and move on to the next pin. Now that the pins have been installed, it's time to add the additional weight that's required for the clutch kit. And this clutch kit, because it's going in an 800 non-roller sled, we'll be using 19.2 grams of total weight. The short ones weigh 0.8 of a gram, and the longer ones weigh 2.1 grams. So in this particular application, we'll use 1 long and 1 short in each of the pins. In this particular application, the best way to install the adjustable weights is to install the long one first and thread it in until it just snugs up against the cotter pin. Then you install the short one up against the longer set screw, and you will snug it fairly tight to the first set screw. There's really no need for any type of Loctite. We've been using adjustable pin weights for a number of years now, and I've never had an issue with them coming out if they're installed correctly by snugging it up against the cotter pin first and then tightening the second one against the first one. Now the adjustable weight has been installed correctly for this setup, it's time to reinstall the new primary spring. You do that first by putting the spring washer back in, which usually comes out when you're cleaning the clutch. Then you install the dust cup, the new primary spring, and the spring cup. Paying attention to the marking on the clutch and the spring cup, you direct the arrow to the mark on the movable face, as that's your installation point. Now replace the spring compressor, clamps the spring down into place. Not quite to the bottom, so you can install the bolts and start them into threads. That way you're assured that the lineup is going to be correct and take place properly. Once all the bolts are started, tighten your spring compressor down and then tighten all the bolts. Now the spring has been installed and the bolts are snug down, remove the movable face out of the spring compressor. Be sure to final tighten the bolts. Now you're ready to reinstall the governor cup. There is a directional arrow. If you line it up with the arrow and the marking you have on the movable face, everything comes into a line. Slowly start each set of buttons down into the button guides of the clutch. Once they've all started, slide it down for a moment to remove all the button clips. And now the movable face is ready to reinstall on the primary face. Same as the primary movable face, the fixed face has a notch in the back of it, which is the aligning notch when you reassemble the clutch. Remembering where the notch is approximately, set it down so that it's straight across the bench from you. Set your movable face back on. Once it makes connection between the spline of the fixed face and the governor cup, you'll feel it kind of slide onto place. Shove it down, and now it's reconnected with the splines. As you tighten the primary back onto the engine, it will fully seat the governor cup to the fixed post. So now the second thing we're going to do is install the secondary part of the clutch kit, which consists of a RER secondary spring and a Teflon coated RER button helix. You only need to compress the secondary enough to get the post retaining clips off of the secondary. Once the clips are removed, you back off the spring compressor. It'll push the helix and the old spring with it. Now just remove the helix and the spring. One thing you'll notice in the springs, for BRP they have a tine which locates into the bottom of the secondary movable face, which for whatever reason they do, I'm not sure. But in the aftermarket, there isn't any of us that use the tine on the spring. It's strictly a straight compression spring and there's no torsional wrap-up required. One other thing while you have the clutch in this position is to remove the movable face off the fixed face and see how many washers, steel washers, are inside of your secondary. In this case, there's two. Typically, removing one of them, which is sufficient, will give you a lot more belt adjustment and belt life because now you can adjust it farther than you could with two of them in there. The way we reassemble them all is just with one steel shim in there. Also in the secondary helix, there's a top spring dust cup and a top spring dust cup washer. On assembly, we eliminate the washer due to the fact that the machining on some of these posts is not in the correct spot, the same as others. There's a tolerance in where they machine it. With this left out, if you have one that's machined lower than the other, you'll achieve more top end from installing the clutch kit. Now looks at this one, the buttons are in great shape, very minimal amount of wear, and we'll put it back together as is. Install the new spring dust cup, and the new helix. At this point of the installation, it's critical that you have the splines of the helix and the splines of the secondary post very well lined up, and it'll be a smooth operation to reinstall it. Once the helix is down sufficiently enough, reinstall the retainer clips. Back up the spring compressor. And everything's locked into place. You can remove the secondary from the spring compressor and we're ready to reinstall all the units back on the snowmobile. Install the primary clutch now, and we'll tighten the bolt physically by hand and we'll finish it off with torque. Torque of the clutch bolt is 70 foot-pounds.